Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to talk to Nitin about application security. So Nitin has about over a decade of experience in application security, and without further ado, let's just get started. So Nitin, can you
Right.
just explain what application security is, Nitin? Like, what is it? Different types. What does it mean? Implementations, and what are some best practices and stuff like around that?
The way I see it, security, is a way to restrict functionality. But I mean, that's the definition, I suppose, way of looking at it, where certain functionalities are blocked. It could be based on your role in the organization, or it could be right, or it could be simply based on your authority. And but then there are more things to security. It also can enable functionality. For example, it can make life a lot easier for you. So yeah, security is about protecting the resources you have, bottom line. And it's really a big topic, but it's in some cases it's also about not just about protecting your resources. Yes, that's very important, but it's also about giving you new functionalities and making your life easier from a functional perspective, not just from a data protection or application protection perspective. So there are some examples of that as well. So that's what security is. Um, and I mean, I'm discussing application security here, but it's in web or computer application security. But that's what is essentially for an organization.
Interesting. Okay. So, are there any Nitin, pitfalls, when you implement security? So, are there any mistakes, or here are the things that you must avoid as an organization when it comes to implementation of security? Let's say starting from the ground up, starting from the scratch. If I'm starting a new organization, or let's say, someone starting a company, what would you say? Hey, here are the things that you must think about and probably avoid or be careful of, Nitin.
Oh, okay, that's actually a very huge list and it keeps changing, right? So, what I would do, I'm not a startup guy. I haven't worked in a startup, so I know very little about startups or anything of that sort, right? But let's say I had an idea and I was starting up a company, then normally, typically startups have limited budget. That's a problem. And you don't know that if your startup is going to be successful, right? You're hoping, you're dreaming, but you don't have, firstly, you don't have the money and you're not sure, maybe, I suppose. And your goal is to get the product out. And I know this for a fact that for a lot of companies, this has been the case where really, you read the news and stuff. And plus, I did kind of work in a startup environment in one of the previous companies. And it was the goal is to get the product out as soon as possible. And the security is really an afterthought. That's also true in big companies, but that's how developers think, I suppose. Maybe that's what people think. But in startups, the pressure is really on, and they don't have the budget, so they tend to cut costs there, I suppose. So, and sometimes it comes back to bite them. So, and it's easy for me to say that you shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do that. But even they know this. If they really, if you ask me, people are making an informed choice, right? About this. So the best thing to do is not really to delegate this decision making. And what I would do is, even if I didn't care, even if I work in security, right? I work in a small part of security, and I'm hardly a domain expert, right? So I just delegate this decision making, a good part of the decision making, to a third party. So I'd probably get an audit company and a security audit company saying, hey, you know what, some outsider say audit, and tell me how I'm, give me a suggestions, and how we are non-compliant, how we are compliant, what's good, what's bad, and they'll come up with a list of things you have to do. And that's the best thing to do. Delegate this to the experts and outsiders, right? So there's no question of impressing your boss or any sort of politics or any what's the term for it? Conflict of interest. And so just delegate it outside. It's similar to how people delegate penetration testing to outsiders. So you don't. You have. I suppose they also test it. Insiders do test have penetration. Penetration testing is basically hacking, is ethical hacking, right? So that's how I look at it. So, but they delegate that part also to outsiders
Interesting.
because they don't, because you want to pretend that you're an outsider and then you know try see how your systems fare up against
Interesting.
their attacks, right?
Hmm.
So but I feel this is a similar reason why you should also delegate your entire it'll cost you a little bit of money. That's the problem, but pay well and get a good delegate this to a third party where they'll tell you, hey, do this etc., do these things, and these are the gaps and stuff. So there's something called the CIS sounds security controls or top 10 security controls or something of that sort. I think that have it with me. So you can, you have stuff like data recovery. It talks about how to you can actually follow that document, and it's a there are top 10 security or top 20 security control tests. CIS sounds, and it has data recovery capabilities. For example, it's not just about security has many parts to it, right? One is one is protecting your data, but also from attacks. But there's another aspect which is availability, which also like, for example, denial of service can attack your can restrict your availability as well, right? So you and forget about attacks. Okay, now let's say that your hardware, your systems crash, or there's a problem, then you need backup data, right? So that's another critical thing. That's also part of security. It's not technically this definitely. I mean, what I just described isn't security, but you could actually lose availability simply because if there's a ransomware attack where your system, your data's encrypted and you don't have the key, you need to pay the ransom for the key, and which is quite common and quite popular nowadays, especially in, um, I think it's increased in COVID. That's what at least I hear more of it in the news. Then you need a good data recovery capabilities, and if you don't have it, then you're in trouble. Yeah, incident response management is another. So I'm just giving you some of the controls, right? There are plenty. So if there's an incident, then how do you, how quickly do you respond to it? One is prevention. It's basically defense in depth. One is prevention, one is cure, and response. How do you do that? How do you have all your softwares and your packages installed in your in your servers and in your laptops? How do you manage that? Right? How do you make sure it's up to date? And really, as you could really keep allocating a lot of budget to it, and the costs do go up. I know that, but these are there are plenty of restricting access controls, and there are plenty of things. But you probably need to do all of this, unfortunately. But it will probably cost you. But I mean, it's necessary.
Interesting. And just as you were saying about these denial of service attacks, right? So I was recently listening to a podcast, and one of the analogies that that the speaker had given was, imagine you're an ATM, and she was trying to describe what a denial of service attack is. Is that they're like, imagine you're an ATM. Imagine you're running an ATM, right? And in an hour, let's say you can service, let's say 10 or 15 people or whatever X number of people, but a denial of service attack is like where the bad guys would send 1,000 people to stand in line so that the real 15 people will not be served. So they go into imagine 1,000 people stand in the line, they go into the ATM, spend 2 minutes, come out, they don't use your service, and your real customers go away, right?
Like a volume-based attack. Yeah, I know. Yeah. That's
right.
one way. Yeah.
That was an interesting.
Yeah, that's simple, right? Yeah, that's what, and that's. That's a very common distributed DDoS. It's called. It's a very common problem, right? And so there are plenty of, but that's not the only thing. There are plenty of controls, and a lot. If you know, at least the areas which I work with, a lot of these controls are internal. So in the sense that your staff make mistakes, so training is necessary. I forgot to mention. It's not that I forgot really. There are plenty of things we can mention, right? So the staff do make mistakes, no matter how well they train. People can make mistakes. How do you have controls against that? So you need to have siloed information, or compartmentalize the access. For example,
Mm-hmm.
there's something called separation of duties, where not, you need a few people to perform a duty or perform a end-to-end functionality.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not too much power with one person.
Mm-hmm.
And also, restrict access based on your roles. And for example, you shouldn't be able to access, an engineer typically shouldn't be able to access HR data, or
Yeah. Yeah.
or confidential data of other employees. A manager should perhaps only know the pay, should have access to the pay of the employee, his own subordinates, and not anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Simple stuff, but it could get more complicated and or more dangerous. So yeah, I mean those kind of things. So it's, I mean, employees could have software running which is out of date,
Mm-hmm.
dangerous, vulnerable, and in their company systems, or in the in the on servers perhaps. So it can,
Interesting.
it need all this. Um, and sometimes even legit software, vulnerability is discovered. It's published, but then how quickly do you update that? How do you detect that? You need controls in place. So I mean, it can really get, it can get really deep. But yeah, when I
Interesting.
would say quite necessary. Yes. Start with the basic controls. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's a document by Sans, and it's a CIS, and it's really good. And that's a good way to start. Delegating to
Interesting.
delegating to an outsider is the best thing you can do.
So,
And that's
when you say delegating to an outsider, Nitin, do you mean from an actual adding of security experts in terms of people? Do you mean purchasing software instead of building it in-house, or do you mean both? Can you talk a little bit about that, Nitin?
I mean, you have like, I'm getting to the question where you said you have a company. What do you do?
Hmm, hmm, hmm,
That what I would do is that, of course, I mean, I'm just saying this off the top of my head, but I obviously do a little more research. But what
hmm,
I probably would do is get a security audit done from an outsider.
hmm. Okay.
So, so they will tell me, and they will look at my systems and tell me. I will also have my internal staff doing this, but that's
Hmm,
one perspective. But we definitely need an external staff doing a
hmm,
security audit and see. And for example, if I'm in healthcare, and I think it's US based HIPAA is some certain set of security policies or compliance standards which people need to meet, companies need to meet. So your compliance standards can vary depending on the depending on the industry you're in, right? So you
hmm,
need
hmm, hmm.
experts who can look at it from a wholesome perspective, who can have the set of staff to do that. They are good at their job when they're doing this. So you go to a good company, get this done, and they will tell you what are the gaps in your system.
Hmm.
And I'm sure a startup would have plenty.
Interesting.
So, and another way of looking at it is the controls which I talked about.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. So another question, Nitin, is especially with the onset of cloud computing, and a lot of companies have a hybrid cloud model. Some of them have a multi-cloud model. Some of them have a multi-hybrid cloud model, right? I mean, it's so many different things when you talk to different people about cloud computing. But how does security look in that in this more complex cloud based infrastructure, and how does the future look like in such an environment, Nitin?
And in fact, I was recently kind of looking at it
Hmm,
casually, and um, uh, as a side project, and it's uh, the Gartner estimates. I don't remember. I think it was. I don't remember when the estimates projected, but it was definitely before COVID, right?
hmm,
And people are moving to the cloud rapidly. And the
hmm,
estimate for is, it could be like 24%, I think, for infrastructure as a service security or infrastructure as
hmm,
a service, but it's quite high. And so it's interesting you bring it up, because there's something which I was looking at recently, and uh, so um, people are moving to the cloud. So consider your typical
hmm,
company, like perhaps an insurance company. So they have, everything is fine. They have their local data center, on-prem systems. In a simple world, it's all great. But now the demand is scaling up.
hmm.
When
Yeah.
when demand is scaling up, then they have to adapt. And also their standards when it comes to data availability, scalability, everything is going up, right?
Mm-hmm.
They need to adapt. So people tend to go to the cloud, AWS, GCP, whatever it is, right? Azure. So now they would probably still have their private data center.
Mm-hmm.
They have their cloud also. So,
Hmm.
right. So I think that's a very popular model, right? The hybrid model. So now what happens is you tend to your admins in your company tend to lose. So they okay when it in the simple world where it's all private data center. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they know their security policies. They have their controls. The admins know what's happening, right? But when you move to the cloud, then whatever policies or tools or whatever you have in your local data center may not apply. On top of that,
Mm-hmm.
users are going through your data center. So you can have your controls easily, but now they are directly accessing via the internet. They're going to the cloud application. It could be a staff users also, right? Or any external users. So then you lose visibility. You need visibility first to to see, hey, this user is doing this at this time. The user performed read write access or just read access,
Mm-hmm.
and or maybe so for example, the use case could be that the user from home was able to access a system which the user probably shouldn't have been able to access from home. I'm not saying
Uh-huh.
that the user is a hacker or had malicious intent. User just click something, it worked for them.
Yeah.
It could be a staff. We are all working from home now, right? You're working from home. You click, you're going about your job, and but maybe there are supposed to be some safeguards in place for certain applications, according to your company's policy, where for good reason, I suppose, that it should not be accessed from home.
Hmm.
Okay. Or
Yeah.
no, from
Makes
up.
sense.
So you need to go to a particular computer in your maybe it's something very critical like defense, but although yeah, I mean, or anything like it has to be done for a particular computer. It's too confidential, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a very high security, but you were able to access it from home. But you need the visibility of that, right? So that's one thing. So when you move to the cloud and for in any reason, I mean, certain simple applications you're able to, so you need to build a story like saying, hey, this user did this at this time, to perform these average, or even it could be application to application. One application was able to make changes to or communicate with another application like this, and so and that changes when you move to the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Also, discovery of new systems. You need like in cloud, it's all scalable and new systems can easily be plugged in. And is the new system, does it have outdated software or vulnerable software? You need to first discover the new system. So these are the kind of problems I don't know if I'm going too deep or if it's simple enough, but these are some examples where it gets complicated.
Interesting.
And, and even your security policies, the rules all change because you're using different tools and different applications and it's going through a different network, all right?
Hmm.
And in the cloud environment, the IPs keep changing, the workloads, IPs keep changing. So it's going through different networks. So it gets complicated. And in fact, that's what I was recently looking into this. But yeah, it's a good question, and I suppose it's a very popular topic. But yeah, it gets complicated, and you need to bring your team up to speed on this.
Hmm. Interesting. So what I'm hearing, Nitin, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that with this whole hybrid infrastructure model, multi-cloud, and all of this it's just going to increase the complexity of providing security or securing
I mean,
the resources of your organization.
yeah, maybe I should have put it in a more crisp fashion where the complexity of the system goes up, then probably a complexity of security also goes up.
Hmm.
So the hybrid
Interesting.
model, the systems are a lot more complex. Simple private data center, right? Where everything's great. It's quite simple at least. So then obviously the complexity in the security goes up.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
And
yeah, that's I mean, everything related to the cloud is a lot, or at least initially, I suppose, seems a lot harder.
hmm.
It gets more complicated, and but yeah, that applies to security as well.
Interesting. And the next question, Nitin, is I mean, I have two, extremely simple, maybe even dumb questions to ask, but what is encryption, Nitin?
Okay, so encryption is basically, in its very simple terms, converting data in a form where it cannot be easily read, right, or converted back into the original state. So you're camouflaging the data. I mean, or rather, you got some data ABCD, you make a hash of it, but and then you transfer it perhaps, or you store it, meant to be read or consumed by some consumer, and uh, and of course you cannot consume it in that form. You have to decrypt it, which is unhash it, or bring it to the original state. So that's what encryption is. So you have to create sufficient confusion and diffusion when you encrypt something, which is um, so. I mean, I'm getting a little deeper here, but let's assume I encrypt a picture, and the picture is of let's say a tiger, or maybe not a tiger. Okay, Mickey Mouse perhaps. Okay, and it has a black head
or a zebra maybe.
No, let me actually say, oh yeah, okay, let's call it a zebra, black and white,
Okay.
two colors. Okay, and now imagine for every piece of data, you get the exact same output, encrypted output. So all the blacks, the same hues or whatever, would have the same output, and all the whites with the same, with the similar shades would have the same output. So the encrypted data, you can kind of see the same zebra pattern.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. It might look like a negative image or something weird, like a like as if your eyesight's all gone bonkers, but it will you can still make out the pattern, right?
Right.
So you
Yes.
need sufficient so a good encryption algorithm needs sufficient confusion and diffusion, where you completely just because uh, uh, two sets of data are the same doesn't mean that the encrypted output is the same. So one could be an input or a function to another. So you get a complete hash of things, and you should be able to easily decrypt it provided you have the key. But it should be very difficult to decrypt or to brute
without
force
a key.
without the key. And so
Interesting.
password management. This brings me to password management and key management, which is also another important thing when it comes to controlling. I'm going back to the topic where people, how do companies protect their systems? But this is also very important.
Interesting. And another, sorry, go on. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something also called hashing, which is similar to encryption in the sense that you don't decrypt it, you get the hash, and but you also get the original message in another way, and you get the same hash and compare. So in password-based logins, you tend to use that sometimes, where you enter your password and the system has the hash stored in it. So you don't have to decrypt anything. You just hash the original password and you compare it with the hash in the system. And if it's the same, the hash is identical, then the user's logged in. So it's similar to encryption, but in the sense you're hiding data, but you don't need to decrypt it.
Interesting. And another silly question, and I promise this is my last silly question, is what's a firewall, Nitin?
Firewalls, well, it's again it's in simple terms, it restricts. It's usually the first line of defense in an enterprise where it's you simply block access and allow access based on certain filters. So you could have firewalls saying that only users or network or traffic from a certain location can access your this particular system. It may not be exposed to the public, for example. So, and you could filter out suspicious packets. And there are plenty of ways you can define your filtering and simply restrict access.
Interesting.
Or it could only allow HTTP-based access, for example, and different other types it may block. So you could easily simply define certain rules to block out. That's usually a first line of defense. You need further access controls. It doesn't identify users and user IDs and stuff. It just blocks access based on some high-level rules.
Interesting. Okay. So, so this was very interesting, Nitin. So I guess my last question for you, Nitin, is, of course, you've been in this industry for over a decade now, and assuming someone is graduating out of college in 2021, or maybe has graduated this year but has an interest in in security, and what would be your advice to him or her, Nitin?
Again, yeah, it depends on. I don't have any specific advice. I think.
Hmm.
I mean, it depends on why you're doing it. If it's lucrative, or if it's that could be a good, fair enough. It's a good reason. Or if you very passionate about a particular aspect in security, and it is lucrative, I suppose, or it still is. But so the good thing about security is that you will find it everywhere in every organization, in every product. It needs it, so you can easily jump into that team, right? If you're interested, then you can easily jump into the team. So that's one. So, but what I would do is I would try to, let's say I'm a tech guy and I want to, depending on the area of interest, I'm being very generic here, but I'd probably uh, try to work for a company where the product is developing a security product, and rather than developing some product and applying security on it. Because then you're working on the cutting edge aspects of security, where you provide maybe services like single sign-on or and OAuth or different. It could be a firewall product or anything for the matter, right? Access and there are plenty of different products out there addressing different use cases. That's what But this is again, I mean, if you are, if you like storage, work for some maybe perhaps work for Seagate or some storage based company, but there are plenty of security based companies. That's one thing. Again, identify the special. I mean, security is quite generic. I mean, there are plenty. I mean, it's a generic term. There are so many different areas where you can get into. So know the field. Also be aware that sometimes security is. I mean, at least my experience has been more about reverse engineering rather than going deep into one specific area. If you enjoy it, then that's great. Then some in areas like penetration testing, etc. It's very useful there. But yeah, you may not. If you don't, you may also have to look at it from a shallow perspective where you need to know a lot of different technologies, and sometimes you may end up using tools. You don't know what the tool does, but it works.
Interesting.
And exploit or metasploit they have these tools where you can hack into systems even if you don't know anything. Just click it, and so you can actually do that. And so that from that perspective, it might get boring. Again, if it's interesting for you, it's interesting. So know what it is and get into it. There are some certain you can read a lot of. There are some newsletters like the Hacker News is great, I think, for stuff like this. It gives you up-to-date information about what's happening with companies, corporates when it comes to security. That's great. I follow it, and it's very good.
Maybe what I'll do is I'll try to leave the link in the description to this one. And I think you also mentioned that there was an article at the start of it. You mentioned something called CIS.
Yeah, you need to register, but it's simple. You get the link.
Interesting. Okay, so I'll leave the link there so that anyone who's interested can probably just go in and subscribe to it and maybe access some of the resources in there. So okay, so that's great, Nitin. So Nitin, I think this was a fantastic conversation. I've learned I wouldn't say a lot, but I think I understand security way better than before the conversation, right? So I think this is great. And what I might do is maybe pick your brains a little more for like a deeper conversation into something else. But we can maybe do that some other day. I just want to thank you for your time, and I think this was very enlightening, Nitin.
Thanks, Adi.